And hi, Richard.
Hi, Fran. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. And I think that today we have a very, very interesting topic because it's just a bit to demystify, which is governance, risk, and compliance. And that's the title for today, how we can make it very simple to understand what it is and how it works.
Okay. Yeah, I have found in the past that it's a topic that, first off, a lot of people don't lump those three together, and they think they're
Right.
individual topics. They all actually are interrelated. A lot of people don't know the difference between governance and compliance, or which one of those is risk management, et cetera. We'll clear that up today. But
Yeah.
I do find that it comes with an intimidation factor that's only for big corporations that have a legal team,
Right.
and that's simply not true. So, simple answer of what is governance, risk, and compliance, and we'll just use the acronym GRC, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's basically how your business stays on course, avoids trouble, and proves it's done things correctly,
Yeah.
right? According to the rules.
Yeah.
All right. Now, the governance portion is basically how decisions are made and who's accountable.
Right.
It's that simple, right? So things like your segregation of duties, like who can approve something, who can request something, and what's the process, involved in requesting and approving things, be they financial or operational, right?
Right.
And then you've got the statements of authority, which is typically financial approvals, right?
Yeah.
Is who can sign for, who can approve things under $1,000 and who can approve things between $1,000 and $10,000, stuff
Yeah.
like that. So that's basically, how are decisions made, be they financial or operational, and who's accountable at
Right.
what stage in those workflows, right? So it's basically your internal compass and rules of the road, right?
Right.
And everybody has processes, everybody, SMEs, mid-market enterprises, global multinationals, everybody has processes. Everybody has an internal compass on how do I get something done? How do I execute a purchase? How do I execute maintenance, right?
Yeah.
That's your governance, right? Risk is what could go wrong or right and how to prepare or either improve the chances of something going right or reduce the chances of something going wrong. Yeah.
Right.
So it's basically your radar looking for storms on the horizon or
Right.
opportunities. Yeah. Everybody already does that anyway when they have a small business. You're always looking for opportunities. You're always looking to see what's going to threaten your business.
Hmm.
And you come up with a plan typically, right? It's very, very simple. So if you purchased insurance for your company vehicles, that's risk management. You transferred the risk to the insurance company, right?
Yeah.
It's also happens to be an element of compliance, but we'll get that in a second. But people are doing this kind of thing anyway. You can't really run any kind of business or have any kind of strategy without risk management because it encompasses both threats and opportunities. So, for instance, an opportunity could be, creating a new product and hitting it in the market. Well, how
Yeah.
can we make that successful? Well, your whole strategy in your business is basically risk management, right? Okay. And then you've got compliance. Compliance is like, how do you meet laws and standards and, both external and internal rules? So it's basically your receipts
Yeah.
that show that you played fair according to
Right.
the law, according to, standards, according to the expectations of any one of a number of group of stakeholders, right? So the best way is to go with like an analogy,
Hmm.
very simple one, right? Um, so when it comes to a vehicle, governance is like the GPS, yeah,
Right.
inside the car. It'll show you the right direction, how you're going to get from point A to point B.
Right.
Yeah. Risk is like the weather forecast. It's going to be snowing out, so slow down, be careful. It helps you prepare,
Right.
right? And you might find an opportunity of a shortcut and how are you going to get to that shortcut and do it safely, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. Compliance is the seatbelt. right? It's it seems like a small issue to put the seatbelt on, but it could save your life
Yeah.
if something goes wrong. Okay, so that's governance, risk, and compliance in a nutshell.
Well, all right. Now I like the analogy because it makes it simpler to understand what it is. And that's what we aiming today to simplify. And in
Yeah.
terms of companies between 100 employees and 1,000 employees, which is pretty much small SMEs, small, medium, or mid-market enterprises, why matters GRC or governance, risk, and compliance?
Well, it matters because you're trying to grow, right? It's a hotly contested area. That's the
Right,
majority of businesses are in the SME and MME space, right? Um, Embracing a method of managing GRC, it protects what you've built
right.
so that you can, increase it, right? It helps you make faster decisions. It helps you avoid fines and making, mistakes.
Yeah,
And it helps you to build trust with customers and with partners and with investors. Without it, basically, you just got profitability to show to people, right? And that's not enough anymore for stakeholders.
right, right. So it sounds like a lot of paperwork, if you may, for a company like this size, because usually it's managed by you have an MD and perhaps is CFO, COO, perhaps not always, but you might have a plant manager or somebody else.
Yeah.
How all these interactions is
Well, it used to be paperwork. There used to be policies
right,
and procedures, right? And risk management happened in strategy meetings, right?
yeah,
It's like, oh, what's going on that we can, what do we do about it? And how do we increase sales? And what do we do about that? Right?
right,
There's your risk management in a nutshell in a meeting. Whether it's two guys or it's 15 guys, they're all having that conversation. So, every leadership team is doing risk management, whether they write it down or not. Yeah. As
Hmm,
far as governance and compliance, that used to be policies and procedures and government legislation. And it basically sat on paper in a folder on a shelf,
right,
right? And when you run into trouble, then you go and read it,
yeah,
right? Typically kind of too late. But in a smaller business, it's easier to manage these things typically because you don't have too many parties,
right,
participating in processes, and you'll have a policy for like expense claims, a policy for purchasing, these kinds of things. And with fewer people, when you're managing it manually, it's easier to manage. But it's not all paperwork anymore, right?
yeah,
With the right tools now, GRC is part of how you work,
yeah,
not a pile of checklists. And it's a lot smoother than people would imagine. And managing it in a system is no more difficult than managing expense claims or using Facebook. It's not difficult. It's just get it into a system where
yeah,
you can manage it so that there's transparency. But also there's a lot more demand coming down the pipeline from customers, from suppliers, from the
yeah.
government, for things like ESG and other kind of
Supply chain,
yeah, yeah. And they want to see not only do you have a policy, but can you prove that you followed it?
right,
Oh, that's a tough one. That's different, right? Do you have a procedure? Yes, we do. Can you prove that you followed that procedure? And who did it? And when did they do it? And what was the outcome, right? It all starts to mix in together, the
yeah,
GRC elements with the way you operate day to day. And it's slowly filtering down to
right,
even
right.
the smallest SMEs. Yeah.
And how, for example, a company now with this topic that now a lot of regulatory mandatory regulatory requirements for large enterprises are in the supply chain. They're asking for things because they had to satisfy
Mm,
their own reporting. Or some SMEs or mid-market is not mandatory, particularly in Europe, not until 2028 or something like that. Well, yeah, 2028 was pushed the date toward that date. Um, Though how they know they are doing it right? Because one thing is my company, how I operate, and the other thing
mm.
is actually, oh, they're asking me all these things. So how I mean, imagine back to the paperwork and the binders that they have, the policies and the way they structure the governance risk and compliance, but how they make sure that they're doing it right? Because one thing is actually satisfy a requirement of a report for supply chain, because
Mhm.
my big customer is asking me for that. And the other thing
Yeah.
actually, is that the right thing to do, or how? So what I mean is actually how we keep track of everything to if it's done right.
Look, it's very simple. It's a very easy test to know if
Yeah,
you're doing GRC right. Yeah.
right.
If you can explain how you make decisions,
Yeah,
how you handle issues,
right.
and how do you meet key regulations and rules, and you can back it up with proof,
Yeah,
you're already doing the core of GRC.
all right.
It's such that simple. So right now, that's become a big thing in the ESG space, right?
Yeah,
Is reporting on upstream and downstream
yeah,
GHG missions, policies, and stuff like that. And a lot of smaller operators and mid-market operators and stuff like that who don't have the compliance burden on them yet to report, as a mandate, they're being hit with requests for that information anyway
yeah,
from upstream or downstream. So everybody's involved in this compliance, but that GRC is no different than accounting. Yeah,
right.
is if you do it the right way, it becomes an outcome based
Yeah,
on drivers that you've put in there, right? Um, and it's like, well, if it's all sitting in binders and you have to go and do research
yeah,
in order to figure it out, then you have to go back and somehow figure out, how do I prove that that's my policy or that that's my procedure?
yeah,
Well, you've got a gap there that you're going to want to solve. Yeah.
yeah. So I can imagine that uh, people that actually they have all in that mind in their minds. Like if people know things because they've been in a company for too long, so they know, oh, that process doesn't apply for this, doesn't apply for the other. The know-it-all guys actually are in the meeting rooms.
Yeah, it's called
Uh,
legacy. Those
yeah,
staff members who know stuff, know how things happen. They know where the skeletons
yeah,
are. They know where the good things are. They know the procedures and they can help expedite things.
yeah.
Um,
And that
yeah,
because actually, if what I'm thinking is because today, many of these people are at the age of retirement or they are moving to the company. So
mm,
how, if a company ignores this, which will be the impact for them? Because ignore, I mean that actually they don't have a way to have this knowledge transfer across the organization. Because now it's
well, you just
getting more and more frequent, these kind of requests.
you just mentioned it. What happens, if you ignore GRC and you leave it as a duty of an individual.
Yeah,
And you said the right word. There's the knowledge transfer. Yeah. Knowledge transfer becomes a lot more difficult. And there's always a risk
yeah,
that the knowledge doesn't get transferred.
right,
And
right.
so from as various people transition into and out of roles, um, a lot of people can get stuck in a particular role because they're doing it really, really well. And they know how to, they know all the policies, procedures,
Yeah,
and everything, right? And they execute them flawlessly. Well, that can actually stop them from a career progression because
yeah,
they're just too good. And you don't want that. You should put as much as is possible into a system. Let the system train people,
yeah,
with human assistance, of course, and transfer the knowledge from individuals into an environment so that you can overcome the challenge of legacy. You
yeah,
can establish legacy without it being dependent on a single individual.
yeah,
And if you ignore it, no, without it, you get blind spots. You get a lack of knowledge transfer. Small problems can grow into legal, financial, or
right.
regulatory disasters. GRC, embracing it and deciding that you need tools to manage it, helps you to stay proactive and it
Right.
overcomes those issues. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that companies are very tight all the time. So that because
Mm.
more demands, more taxes, all these issues that are today in the geopolitical environment. That is a war. There's no war. They are bombarding countries just beside Europe. Ukraine for the last 2 years. Well, so many companies, and I heard that before. Like they delay decisions for. I quite remember. I still remember this company because they started to delay the decision to digitalize part of their organization for the past 2 years, and the excuse always is the same: Ukraine war, and but at the end, it's like a playing defense all the time, like a reactive instead of responding to the market. So what is GRC then? How it plays is we play defense. Is about protection, or actually is the other way around? That actually, if leveraged correctly, can help grow the company.
It's actually both, Fran.
All
To tell you
right.
the truth. Yeah, no, it's absolutely both. And for people who believe that it's just about protection,
Yeah.
it's not, right? Yeah, it also allows efficiency. It allows you to identify opportunities if you're embracing it correctly with a correct system that links it to data and operations, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It makes audits faster. It makes partnerships smoother. It
Right.
makes taking on investment, much easier. Generating government compliance reports becomes the click of a button as opposed to an
Right.
entire project. And it also clarifies operations. It makes things, it adds clarity for
Yeah.
everybody, right?
Yeah.
All of that is kind of necessary, to grow
Yeah.
without, total chaos, right? A lot of companies, they'll embrace some growth opportunity and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
things just get, they can get exponentially more chaotic. But if you've got the frameworks in place, in terms of how you work, and you've got a system, and here's our risks, and here's our opportunity, blah blah blah. All of that becomes easier. You don't want to have to spend 1 minute more than necessary
Right.
mastering governance, risk, and compliance, but you
Yeah.
don't want to spend 1 second ignoring that it's
Right.
important.
And so in the space of mid-market or small enterprises, it should be an owner, or is a spread responsibility for GRC then?
Well, there needs to be some element of leadership that
Right.
sets the tone, right? Like with anything inside of a company, your sales processes and your production process, stuff like that. But GRC, everybody has to contribute to it, because
Right.
GRC basically touches every single employee, in one way, shape, or form.
Right.
If you've got a system that can lend some transparency to it, GRC becomes something that your whole team supports, not just a
Yeah.
compliance officer. And yes, the concept of a compliance officer has existed, or almost
Yeah.
like internal policemen, right? And I don't ascribe to that approach. I believe that you need certain roles to set the agenda, and to make sure that people are honoring the agenda. But
Yeah.
if it's in a system and it's impacting operations, then GRC is going to be a part of everyday operations, and people can't help but participate in GRC outcomes.
Right. So it's like having different officers, like a health and safety officer, like a compliance officers, and this and so quality control officer. So it's spread around the whole organization with different functions.
Yeah, there needs to be somebody setting the tone and
Yeah.
driving the agenda,
Right.
but everybody has to participate,
Right. Right.
right? And in terms of ownership, I guess I don't like to call it ownership, because that implies ownership also of the outcomes.
Right.
I prefer to say, who should lead GRC in a company. And if you're of a particular size, you may have a compliance officer,
Right.
right? But it should be a part of the leadership of whoever's leading the business in the first place.
Right.
Very often you don't have, for a company that's not big enough, they won't have a purchasing and procurement department. So finance will set the tone for purchase process compliance,
Right.
that kind of an idea, right? So it really depends on the size of the organization, and we're talking about a broad spectrum here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I like to say it more as, not ownership, but leadership.
Right. Excellent. And probably here's a confusion that happens because one thing is GRC and the other thing is regulatory requirement like ESG or SRS or SES. So what is the difference or are intertwined altogether?
Okay, they're not the same thing, but they're
Right.
definitely connected. Okay,
Yeah.
ESG, best way to say it, ESG is what you care about, right?
Right.
Governance risk and sorry, environmental,
Environment. Yeah.
social issues, and governance issues, right? GRC is how you manage and prove it,
All
right?
right.
So yeah, I care about GHG emissions. Okay, well, how are you managing it and how are you proving it? That requires a GRC platform
Right.
of some sort, some
Yeah.
system, be it manual or software, right? GRC makes ESG real and trustworthy. Otherwise, it's just more stuff in binders sitting up on a shelf.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say that ESG is a subset of GRC.
Mm.
Okay. It's a definition of, what you care about. And governments are putting out all sorts of, ESG reporting frameworks. They want
Yeah.
you to report back on what you care about and how you're caring about it and how you're
Right.
managing it. How you can do that without a GRC platform, I don't know. But then you mix ESG with ISO or some other framework, they all fall under the umbrella of governance, risk, and compliance,
Right.
like SEC compliance in the US or something along those lines, right? They all sit under the umbrella of GRC. ESG is a subset that defines it's in the acronym, right? The environmental, social, and governance things that are of concern to your company.
Right. Right.
And GRC is how you're going to deal with those. Yeah.
Yeah. So the companies that have and a little bit coming back to the to earlier conversation. So having policies just mean that the company say, well, we are GRC, we are good. So or
No,
is uh,
no, 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 no. No, that's the thing is, people thinking a compliance officer is the one authoring and managing the processes
right.
and the policies, right? If you have manual policies, trying to satisfy GRC with more policies, what you've got is policies.
Right.
That's it. You don't have governance. You don't have compliance.
Right.
Compliance is an active word, and risk is about risk management. That's a process, right? And governance is, yeah, it can be written into a particular process and a policy and stuff like that.
Mm.
Um, the way to tie it all together isn't just to have the documents, right? What are your risk responses? What are your compliance processes? And have they been executed? Have they been successful? Have we made any adjustment to them?
Right.
You
Right.
got to make them all usable and trackable. Having policies just means you have a policy. And some people, look, it could be about anti-slave labor policy, right?
Yeah.
How much is that going to impact you day to day? Well, every single time you choose a new supplier,
Right.
right? So, did you actually check to see whether they were a risk to that policy? Is there a procedure in place for checking? Do you have anti-money laundering compliance
Right.
as a part of your policies? And did you check whether that supplier is on the blacklist in your country? That kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're all actions that need to be taken. Now, whether or not you can prove those actions and prove that the policy is effective and that it's practiced, that's a completely different circumstance than I have a policy for this,
Right.
you
Right.
know? So policies aren't enough. You don't have GRC if you have policies. You don't have GRC if you have procedures. You
Right.
have to be able to make them usable and trackable and real.
That's it's that looks like a very complex operation because it's
Mm.
not only your internal documentation, your internal processes, also is how interact with external suppliers or partners or customers. So when you have certain complexity, it does start to get very, very difficult and expensive. So how technology help with this? Because I guess
Well,
actually it definitely people are intelligent and they're very capable, but also at the same time they go on holidays or they retire or they get sick or they go maternity leave or paternal leave, and that thing start always sitting in spreadsheet and somebody's head. Not always is a kind of a trackable, if you may, or timestamp.
all of it will have some presence in the way you operate, right?
Right,
Um, Having a GRC platform that's
right,
linked to actual operational execution, it replaces all the spreadsheets and silos,
yeah,
all into a single system where you're actually able to see, well, did we do any supplier selections this month? No. Well, then we don't have to worry about whether we complied with our anti-money laundering
right,
policy, do we? No, it's not relevant. So your report is like 0 incidents. But if you did select a new supplier, did you do an AML check? Did you check whether or not they
yeah,
have a policy themselves on slave labor or whatnot? And you'll do that operationally. It should be, it's driven by policy. It's driven by, government regulation. It's demanded by your stakeholders. So you're going to do it.
yeah,
And having a system that tracks it and manages it, assigns it to you, records it, doesn't make it more complex. It makes it manageable. It makes it
right,
entirely manageable. Otherwise, it all starts to become, a bunch of policies, a bunch of versions of policies on a shared drive somewhere, or
yeah,
they're sitting up on a shelf, spreadsheets, trying to put a
yeah.
status against each supplier, all that kind of it's just a bloody nightmare. So GRC
Um, I'm,
platforms are
yeah,
specifically made to manage these specific things. And I think they're very, very important.
yeah,
You get clarity, you get automation, you get execution feedback, you get peace of mind.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Especially during audits or crisis. All of this
yeah,
stuff is fine and well until you have a crisis. Then everybody starts looking around like, what was our policy? Did we
yeah.
follow it? Who didn't?
I'm
Whose
laughing
fault is it?
because
Yeah.
I still receive these emails with a spreadsheet that say, "Oh, we have to set you up as a supplier," and it's a
Mm.
spreadsheet, and you have to key in manually all the information, and then you don't know where that goes. But I'm guessing that goes into a drive with the name of the customer. Say, "Yeah, we just fulfill the obligation to ask all this information for whichever reasons in terms of compliance." But actually, it doesn't look that the system is just a share drive. It's not really a system that actually applies for everything. Then when the audits come and say, "What about this supplier?" and they start to look into dig into the share file.
That's a very typical approach. It is regrettably quite common.
Yeah,
And historically, GRC platforms for managing that kind of stuff
yeah,
were cost prohibitive, were for the big corporations
right,
typically. I'm happy to say that with Trinity, we built out GRC in a very, very cost-effective way that's competitive with any enterprise-grade solution, anything. And it's accessible to the SME, just like QuickBooks made accounting accessible
yeah,
to SMEs and MMEs in the early 80s. We are making GRC and EAM
yeah.
accessible to SMEs and MMEs in the 2020s.
Yeah, and if a company is still not ready to go digital with with Trinity for GRC, which will be the recommended steps for them to start to prepare for the eventuality that will come? How would it, which is the smallest steps they can take to get there?
Okay, well, if they don't want to embrace software to manage it, understand that I would advise they embrace some software to manage it as quickly as possible because you
Right.
get a real you it just becomes something that it's not a matter of if you're going to do it, but when you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And the more of that activity that's going on that isn't systemized some way, just it's going to make it more painful to adopt something later.
Right.
So I would suggest embrace a solution. Yeah. Yes, you can start small with just a few items in there,
Yeah.
but that makes it way easier to grow and to scale up. But if you're not going to go the software route, you're likely doing it already. Start with your most important risks and
Right.
opportunities and recording them and what your responses are going to be. Make sure that you have the core policies required for, basic compliance in your market and stuff like that. Now you're talking about a micro enterprise approach, though. I wouldn't suggest that any
Yeah.
growing SME or MME translate start small as don't have software for it, don't have a tool that can help you, right? I would suggest, especially between 100 and 1,000 employees, give us a call, put something like Trinity in place, and start with few data items until you get used to the methods and the means, and it'll grow over time. You don't have to come up with an entire framework on day number one, that suddenly changes the way people work. No, you're basically setting up an environment that works the way you're already working and ensures that, policies and procedures and risk management and stuff like that are written into your operational execution, and that you close the feedback loop so that you don't have to worry about that becoming a monolithic issue in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's what I would recommend. I'd recommend giving us a call. We can help.
Fantastic. I think that we covered a lot today. Good things to digest in the organization after this call. But I really like the analogy that you put at the beginning, the GPS, where you have the direction, the weather reports in terms of risk, and the seatbelts in terms of compliance. I think that actually that is a very good analogy, because sometimes people say, well, why I need to put a seatbelt? But actually you don't know.
It's the law.
No, you never know what happens on the road. And many times it's not even your fault. It's somebody else's fault.
That's right.
I'm not blaming anything, I think, but imagine in business, who will guess what happened in the past 3 weeks with Israel, Iran, and the US? And if your market is dependent on that regions or dependent in oil, that would be a massive issue. And how having risk, how to manage this risk is something actually had to be taken into account.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Richard,
this goes along with our previous theme, by the way. I just want to make this little note.
Sure.
Yeah. Putting GRC in place does not control your people. Okay. You already likely have policies where you want them controlled. What it does, especially when it's in a system context, is it records good behavior.
Yeah.
It helps identify if things are steering the wrong way, but it also identifies good behavior. It protects people just as much as it protects the company.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and the same with KPI. Some people do use it as a stick, when in reality it should be not a performance issue. It's like an improvement tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard, and we'll catch up next week.
Great, Fran. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good chat.
Bye-bye.